Okay, I'm going to talk about the innovative directional verb prefixes, and I'm going to call them directionals, just to keep that phrase from being too long. And I'm going to use them to provide a preliminary subgrouping of the Qiangic languages. It should help determine which languages are members and which are not. And following Jacques Sims and various other people, the modern speakers, I'm going to term this, and I have no idea how to pronounce that, though I made it up. Aramaic, okay, rather than Qiang, because none of these people call themselves Qiang, and I need the Qiang for the next higher grouping above anyway. Next. Modern scholarship probably begins with Sung Hong Kai's proposal that Qiangic, Pumi, Gairangic, Ursuic, as well as other languages found in the West Sichuan ethnic character, formed a subgroup. This subgroup, called Qiangic, was based on shared similarities and not regular sound meaning correspondences. What's the difference? Shared similarities could be contact phenomena, they could be historical phenomena, they could be a mix of both. So the under differentiation is not necessarily wrong, it's just under differentiated. Next. Like Sun, Matisoff treated Qiang as a subgroup, but he went one step farther than Sun, describing the innovative directional prefixes as a defining characteristic of the Qiang languages. That seems regular. If there's something wrong with that impression, I'm sure Jim will chime in. It is my impression that neither Sun nor Matisoff labeled it explicitly as a Qiangic subgroup, but just a subgroup. And then we've gone from there. Cherkova put a bunch more data that made strong support for an aerial interpretation of many of the similarities. A similar comment in a way was made by Lapola, who noted the actual forms of the systems in different languages do not correspond in any way. I would say that means it's part of an aerial effect rather than a genetic effect. Okay, next. Many of the directionals are innovations in Qiangic. Maybe all, but I don't know that. So they occupy the second slot in Lapola's schema for the Qiangic verb. The number of, well, go to the next one. And here's the template for the Qiang verb complex. Number 2 is directionals, and I'm doing nothing with third person indirect directives. Notice number 1 is an intensifying adverb. So this is at the edge of any sort of verb phrase. I'd expect to see that kind of adverb, and then you move in. These look like they've developed from adverbs elsewhere. Okay, next. The directionals themselves have a large number of differences. Matisoff suggests, based on Buffon, that there are roughly 13 directional categories cross-linguistically, with specific languages having the individual languages having, I need a little editing there, having between 3 and 10 categories. He describes the categories as indicating the real or figurative orientation of the event. A little bit later, I'm going to comment that he and others have gone forward beyond this and called them tense aspect markers in some cases. This is where you would expect that continuation to end. Similarly, Lapola suggests that languages of this group have from 5 to 10 directionals. And I like this because it lists some of them. Up, down, upriver, downriver, inward, outward, towards the speaker, away from the speaker, and sometimes toward the mountain, away from the mountain. Moving on. Next. Evans describes this semantics, stating that the meanings range from indicating literal directionality to metaphoric extensions. Evans, Jacques, and Matisoff note that sometimes they're further developed into perfective or imperfective markers, or tense aspect markers. Deciding which meaning comes first when you have alternate meanings on the same, which is obviously, or seems obviously the same place, problem, requires somebody to work out all the ideals about what got changed into what in which order, what was the older semantics. I thought I would leave that up to somebody else to worry about. Moving on. Thurgood.
Sorry. Yeah.
Back to Thurgood. For Thurgood, Jacques writes for movement concrete directional verbs, the directionals indicate the direction of the action, but for most verbs, they seem to have already grammaticalized into tense aspect markers. Now, this is interesting, and I'd love to see somebody follow up on that, but it doesn't indicate any genetic connection. The development of vexuals out of directionals is clearly attested in other languages and other language families, but I haven't seen something this elaborate into Bedo-Berman. Next. The tables. Table 1 shows Qiangic and its division into 4. See the 3? There's a glitch in my machine that turns 4s into 3s, but into 4 components. The first one was the one that is usually what the people refer to as Qiangic, but I'm going to call Muraic, and Pumi, Ursui, and Qiangic. These are the big 3, and you'll see why I put them as big 3 in a minute. These items display similar functions and corresponding forms show descent from a common source, that is the genetic relationship. Well, forms playing functional, that's displaying functional similarity, but non-corresponding forms show convergence due to contact. And when you've got 16 forms going around in and out, this can be a problem sorting out what's what. Next. The table is basically, if you go down the left side, there's the Muraic languages, Pumi, Ersuic, Qiangic. You notice I skipped Muya because it depends on a difference in one form, one way or another, where I would put it. But what is clear from this is you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all relate back to Qiangic. If you look at that chart for a while. Notice outside of my outline here, you've got things like in Muraic, you've got a couple of sequences that don't fit with the rest. That's some other language interaction. The ones that don't fit are outside of it, and that helps define what is inside of it. Okay, next. We talked about Thurgood, and it's not on the chart, as you notice. Various people would want it on the chart. Why did I put it on the chart? Well, because Thurgood, if you look at the table down near the bottom of this, there's only 2 forms in Thurgood that seem to correspond to the rest of the master forms that we had in the table before. So it's related, but outside of the Qiangic group. Okay, next. Oh, back again, sorry. Ndraba has typological similarity to the Qiangic languages, but with non-cognate forms. Doso, which is also been suggested for Qiangic, simply doesn't have directionals. So it too would be thrown out of the central group. Next. Nashi. The Pumi is thrown in here as a representative of Qiangic. And it would be useful there to recognize that's not what I'm comparing. What I'm comparing is Pumi is not like any of the rest of them. the Nashi things, if you notice, there's several places where they look like they're cognate to each other, but then you go back to the Pumi or the Qiangic and you discover, yeah, that's true, but they're not the same. They're typologically the same. Some of the categories are. Next. Okay, Nashi or Naish has a little of this and a little of that. It has spatial deixis system with 5 directional prefixes and 2 semantically bleached verbs denoting come and go. But all the forms for downward seem to be, and all the forms seem to be related to each other, but not, okay, that's fine. There's no similar, you can look at the table. These aren't going to match up with the Qiangic. The 5 Yutong Hua prefixes are similar typologically with 2 upwards, downwards, inwards, upwards, and wu outwards, but they're not the same forms. Thus, they make this language outside. And this language fits nicely with Nashi for other reasons, and I'm not going to present that. Okay. Now, next. Good. At the core of the paper is the realization that on the basis of one complex interwoven innovation, and I know that one is not enough, but the more complex it is, the more it's impossible to arrive at it by just contact. And notice these aren't identical. If it was contact, you'd expect identity, but there's little differences in them. One is developed into a tense aspect marker, one is developed into a up the river, or another one's developed into down the river. That is, this is a system in change. The similarities are due to inheritance. And okay, there are 4 major subgroups can be reconstructed for Proto-Qiangic. And you see the 4, there's the same ones on the table. None of the rest of them, and I looked at a bunch of them, even came close to this similarity. So this is a good place to start for basic chunks. These directionals sometimes show that a language has non-membership in Qiangic, and other times membership in Qiangic. Delete one of the nons. Okay, and I think that's the end of this, but let's try to find out. Yeah, and one more. Okay, and I think we probably have a couple of minutes.
Oh yeah, you have.
Yes, we have plenty of time for questions and comments. And that, can it be set up so that the chat shows the possibility of raising hand? If not, please either ask your question by unmuting yourself or say in chat that you want to ask a question.
Does somebody want to have the table up there, or is that irrelevant?
Yeah, it would be good, Graham, to have the table with the table 1 with the various.
I'll put it back up.
With the data other than Naish.
Looks like Scott has a comment.
Yep, that's what I said. Looking at your Naish forms, you have that ma or m, me, ma downward,
Yeah.
which doesn't show up elsewhere. And you pointed out that that's something which distinguishes that group. When people are looking at these things, nobody ever thinks about Tibetan because they're not there in the verb, but Tibetan has 2 little particles that go at the end of a sentence, ya upward and ma downward.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I'll bet that, well, I'm sure that that ma directional that you've got in Naish is somehow connected to the Tibetan. And my suspicion is that it's borrowing. Since
I wouldn't have any problem with that one.
Right. But then the question comes, so if you're trying to use these forms to sort of build a tree, does that mean that that my is a nice innovation that distinguishes that as a group, or did they maybe once have the same group as the same prefix as everybody else, and the Tibetan influence is just that they replaced it with something to sound more Tibetan?
Yeah, it's clearly not historical then. Or if it is, let me start again. I don't have any other thing I could say about it because I saw nothing around that looked like it and behaved like it. So for my purposes, I'm throwing it out of the genetic file for Qiangic. What you do with it, it sounds very interesting to look at the Tibetan and see if that works out. Again, that's one form. Notice what I like about this thing is you've got 4 basic languages here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 categories that seem to line up more or less. And where they don't line up, that should be you should be able to account for most of them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one could also point out that there are some demonstratives that have downward, that down there. For example, Lahu has mo, which is that thing which is lower.
Well, the semantics works, but notice what we've got here is this is number 2 in the complex for Qiang verbs, and all of these come in the second slot. So they're not only six different things, but they come in the same slot.
Can I ask a minor question?
Yeah.
I'm confused about whether it's Aramaic or Maraic, whether the lowercase r comes first or the lowercase m comes first.
The R comes
I
first.
don't care which way you want it. What do you guys want to do with that?
Well, because Maraic is a subgroup of Kuki-Chin. It's a little.
No, the R comes first.
Yeah, so that's what Jacques and Tim say. Yeah.
Okay, R comes first. That's fine with me. I thought about it. I couldn't figure out any way to decide.
Actually, if you look at this table 1 and you see the forms, we can see a number of Tibeto-Burman cognates there. For example, just the clearest one, the up directional prefix can be related to the tak form, which means go up. And if we look at many other Tibeto-Burman subgroups, we find that the directional motion is a possible separate pre-head versatile verb that indicates direction of motion. So for example, in Lisu, da, ya, up and down. And here you have just the Tibeto-Burman cognate grammaticalized into a directional prefix with the same sort of meaning in the same position.
Yeah, that seems quite plausible.
I like the comment, thank you.
On the other hand, some of the other forms don't have quite such neat etymologies. So we need to look more at this. It's great that you've raised this, Graham.
Yeah, well, I think it might be a way to do a preliminary what's in and what's out, because it takes so long to compare any 2 languages. I like to have at least a possible first guess. Other things, if you want to nitpick, no, I'm trying to find a neutral word for nitpick. There's not probably one. You want to worry about detail. For those reconstructions of Pumi and stuff like this, what happened to the verb after the initial consonant? What happened to the vowel after the initial consonant? It's not clear. It gets reduced sometimes in one of the languages. It gets its character changed in another, but you have no question what the form is.
Hmm.
there are reconstructions of some good subsets of this, by the way. Umi, some Qiang, the first one, Umi. Okay, I'm happy.
Any further questions or comments?
This is Ken. I have a quick comment.
Ken, go ahead.
So I like this, really like presentation. I'm thinking of how some innovation of directionals in Cookie Chain could establish or confirm the existing subgroupings or negate. So I think that would be a good test.
Well, as long as we have enough of them, it seems to work okay. I'm getting nervous when you don't have more than, say, 4 different groups there. Notice anything past the first column has multiple languages in it. Okay.
Okay, any more questions or comments?
One,
Well, comment, Graham, do you want to add anything?
well, comment. I thought when I first started giving linguistic talks in '74 that I would some point stop being nervous when I did it. Now that I'm 74, I'm giving up on that theory.
You're still a kid, Graham.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, well, let's give Graham a big round of applause, either through the chat or in your reactions. Here we
You
go.
do sign language, or no? That's laughing.
Yes, well, look on your screen and you'll see all our hands clapping.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Some are clapping with one hand.
Oh,
Well, some are clapping with 2 hands, some are clapping with 1 finger.
no 3s out there.
There's
Okay,
some
that's
thumbs
good.
up as well. Here's a thumbs up. Okay, well, thank you, Graham, and wonderful to hear from you, and good to see that you're continuing with research, even though we've let you off your task of being LTBA editor finally.